Okay. Hello, welcome. My name is Annie Deely, and you are at the ReImagine Turtle Creek Watershed and Airshed Communities Plus meeting, the first one of 2022. We're going to be talking about alliums, but before we get started, let's go over the agenda. I'm going to give like a short intro, mostly just announcements, and then we'll talk about ReImagine Food Systems, one of our working groups. And then I will hand the mic over to Marion Cook. And we will have a Q&A panel, and then we'll wrap up by 8 o'clock tonight. Okay. So for those of you who don't know, ReImagine TCWAC is a grassroots sustainability initiative meant to foster sustainability projects and education. One of our three main projects are a wellness podcast, an effort to revitalize the Monroeville Mall into a hub for sustainability, and ReImagine Food Systems, which is a backyard gardening program. So the couple of announcements. Happy New Year. TCWAC first started in 2019 as a series of community visioning sessions. So it's been 2 years officially of TCWAC. So yay, yes. One of the more exciting things, it's been a while since we've met at one of these monthly programs. The last one was in October. We got a grant that fully funds our food system program, which is awesome. So now we're fully funded and we can buy all our things and we don't have to have a fundraiser at the end of the year. Well, anyway, the other thing is I wanted to announce our upcoming monthly programs, which is the first Monday of every month. The next one's on building community trust. The one in March is on the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN. And then our one in April is going to be on food forests. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to a past Rhea who spoke at a fundraiser we had last year for a gardening program about ReImagine Food Systems and how it fits under the whole TCWAC umbrella. And yeah, thanks for being here.
Share a little bit about our ReImagine Food Systems.
Can we hear the sound?
Came from and where we're heading. Like many grassroots programs, we reimagine. I don't hear any sound currently.
Sorry.
I just want to share a little bit about our ReImagine Food Systems program and where we came from and where we're heading. Like many grassroots programs, we ReImagine TCWAC started from an eager group of citizens, about 50 people from dozens of communities within the Turtle Creek watershed and airshed. We gathered at the Braddock Library to brainstorm ideas and visions that people wanted to see happen in their communities. All ideas were written down, hundreds of them. And this was the first ReImagine TCWAC Plus meeting. Next, these hundreds of ideas were written down, were organized into 5 main categories of interest. These are the building and renewable energy, plastics diversion, health and wellness, land management, and of course our group, food systems. Although a smaller group, ReImagine Food Systems is still a community-based, volunteer-led program that focuses our efforts in areas impacted by environmental and social inequities. Of the 32 municipalities that fall in the Turtle Creek watershed, 15 are food deserts and 16 are environmental justice communities. Our mission at ReImagine Food Systems is to build backyard food gardens for people who want to grow healthy foods in their own yards. Through our program, we identified potential barriers that exist for many, making it difficult for folks to successfully garden. We primarily identified cost, critters, and confidence. For many, initial costs can be overwhelming. Critters and pests may eat your crops and you won't know what to do about it, or folks may not have the confidence or the know-how to even begin growing their own food. For people who qualify, RIFS is able to help folks overcome these barriers. We provide all materials and education needed to get our gardeners started, support them for 6 seasons over 2 years, and hopefully instill empowerment and enthusiasm to continue growing food as a lifelong interest. As part of our program, we conduct site assessments to ensure adequate sun and water access and soil testing for possible lead contamination. Once families are accepted into our program, we provide 2 3-foot by 5-foot by 12-inch raised garden beds, plenty of high quality and locally sourced soil and compost, seeds and seedlings for spring, summer, and fall harvests for 2 years. We also provide site visits with a master gardener to provide hands-on education. We provide resources and education using organic and integrated pest management practices, critter fencing to help keep rabbits, groundhogs, and deer out, a basic gardening toolkit that includes gloves, trowels, and the Grow Pittsburgh Garden Primer. They're one of our partners. Thank you, Grow Pittsburgh. Access to on-site garden workshops through professionals at Grow Pittsburgh, and we also provide listings of free workshops and courses that are available virtually. We take a lot of care and effort to source our materials with sustainability in mind, from locally sourced hemlock to the soil and compost sourced from AgRecycle, which is created from local redirected food and animal waste to produce nutrient-rich soil, and the organic practices that we use that minimize health and environmental risks associated with conventional gardening practices. Last year, we piloted our program over a single planting season with 2 homes in communities that we had easy access to. We put 1 in Trafford and 1 in Monroeville. And now in our sophomore year, we have quadrupled our capacity and have signed on 6 new households this year, plus our pilot family from last year. When deciding which areas to serve this year, for 2021, it was important for us to make connections with local food banks, churches, and local community groups in food desert communities. We also took the following statistics into consideration: the rate living below poverty level, and how many children and family members our gardens could benefit. Looking within our watershed, the community of Wilmerding had the highest population, 35.5% living below the poverty line, so we decided to start there. After performing outreach in this town and 5 surrounding communities, we received 49 applications. Of these applicants, we met with hopeful gardeners, assessed yards, and selected 6 households in Wilmerding, Wall, and East McKeesport, who indicated need and were great candidates for our gardening program. The really exciting part of RIFS is that participants of similar backyard gardening programs have reported sharing produce from their gardens with an average of 9 people outside of their household. What an amazing way to empower gardeners and feed communities with food grown in local backyards that otherwise are non-productive pieces of earth, right? What we call the American lawn, which is an outdated habit and an ecological burden. We're now using these backyards and helping to turn them into an opportunity to build community and help relieve food scarcity. As a program that is coordinated and led by volunteers, this year we were thankful to receive 200 volunteer hours during our fence making, garden installation, and planting events. RIFS is also thankful for the support and some funding through Protect PT and grants that they receive, such as Heinz Endowment. We've also received financial donations from League of Women Voters and received in-kind contributions from Plumline Nursery and Harrison City Garden Center. To all of our contributors, I want to extend a very warm thank you. I really appreciate it. As we continue to help our gardeners grow food for 3 out of the 4 seasons for 2 years, we find that we still need one-time direct and monthly donations to help fund our current gardens and continue expanding to address food insecurity and empower more households through our hands-on backyard gardening program. Your donations at reimaginetcwac.org/fundraiser and purchasing our raffle tickets for some of the cool baskets from local businesses will help us continue this important work. As we continue.
Okay, so Brian just asked for donations, so that's why I stopped it. But again, this was a video from a fundraiser that we had last May for the program, where we had some local folk bands like play on Facebook Live to help us raise funds. Okay, so now that we've learned a little bit more about ReImagine Food Systems and what we do, last update about food systems is that we're currently looking for volunteers, especially with things like assembling the critter fencing and moving soil into our beds. So I'm going to be sharing the volunteer sign up link. And with that, I'm going to pass the mic over to Maren Cook by stopping my share. And again, Maren is going to give us a presentation, overview on alliums, and then we're going to have a Q&A panel. So please, if you have questions, throw them in the chat or feel free to ask them when the time comes.
Okay, let me get my right slide queued up. And it is this one. And let's see. Slideshow. So you just show the whole browser window. Okay. Like so? Okay. Can people see that okay, or is it too little?
We can adjust it
Okay.
on our end.
It's like there's a lot of wasted space up there.
If you go into slideshow presenter view, it should only show
Presenter view. Okay, but it's still within a window.
but it's bigger.
But it's bigger.
Looks good.
Yeah.
Is that big enough?
I think so.
Oh, wait a minute. Oh, I see. I'm seeing multiple screens. Okay, this is interesting. All right. I need to arrange things on my desktop here so that I can see. Make this smaller. So this doesn't change anything for you, right? What I just did? You still have it nice and big? Okay. This, however, is on slide 8. What happened to slide 1? Okay. Is this a decent view that you have?
Yes.
Okay. All right, great. So there's something like 800 species of allium, but only a few are typically eaten. We'll talk about some of the types most commonly grown in home gardens. And why do we want to grow them? One thing is they're delicious. And in fact, they're healthy just because they're delicious. They give a lot of flavor without adding salt or butter. So they're among the most powerful of the herbs. And onions of all colors are great sources of vitamin C, vitamin B6, potassium, folate. Garlic has C and B6 and thiamine and potassium and calcium and phosphorus and copper and manganese. And they all have these sulfur compounds, which have a lot of really great health effects as well, organosulfates. You are probably most familiar with bulb onions. Everybody buys them at the store, and these are all different bulb onions. That big one on the left is actually about 5 inches across. And it is a yellow onion, as is the smaller one on the right that's only about 3 inches across. And then in between are red onion, and white onion, and a yellow onion cut in half. It's just the skin that is yellow, tan, brown, not the onion itself, but you can see the way it grows in layers there. Still trying to make this work. Okay. So how do you grow onions? Well, one easy way is growing them in sets. And so they're basically little tiny onions, and then they will grow up into big onions, and you'll plant them under the ground, but then they'll sort of expand upward and wind up a little just at the ground surface. So you can either grow them from sets, which you plant in the spring and which you can buy typically at feed stores. And there is a feed store, Turtle Creek has a Best Feeds, which has onion sets and shallot sets and all the sets, several kinds of onion sets. Or you can grow them from little plants, which you can make yourself from seed, and seed is of course very cheap, but you have to get your act together to do the seeding in around December. And then, or you can buy bundles of seeds from bundles of little plants like that from seed catalogs. And then you separate the roots out and you plant them in the ground down, so that the roots are going down, and you fill in around the roots. And then here's just a picture of, these are white onions growing in a field and found in a market from that same farm. I did not grow those white onions. I actually haven't done a lot with bulb onions yet myself, but later during the Q&A, my fellow master gardener, who's also now come aboard to help out with ReImagine Food Systems, Kristen and Sarah Mitchell, will be joining me for Q&A. So she'll probably handle most of the bulb onion questions, and we'll just tag team it there. So that's the basics on bulb onions. Seed them in December or buy sets or plants in the spring for a little head start. Now, do you enjoy potato leek soup? Leeks are a very mild cousin of the onion. They're those big things with the white bottoms and the green tops. The upper green leaves can be a bit tough, so the white lower part is more desirable. And that's why gardeners and farmers worldwide often maximize the white part by mounding up soil to basically blanch them. The way is also done for asparagus in Europe. That batch had a bunch of mulch, but I didn't really keep up with the mounding. So these leeks that I grew are not white all the way up, but really it's the upper leaves that are sort of spreading out and being loose that are doing most of the photosynthesizing, and they are the ones, that's the part that is rather tough for your potato leek soup or whatever. But I cut them off, I save them in the freezer in a bag of vegetable scraps, and they are great in soup stock because they still have the great flavor. These are more typical. These were from, I think one was from a store and the other two were from a farmer's market. And the one on the left was returned to me when I gave her some other leeks that I had from a neighbor. And it languished in the refrigerator a little longer before the very day I took this photo for this presentation last week. I made potato leek soup, but the other ones I think are from a farmer's market locally. Now, one thing to know about leeks is with all that soil mounding, they do tend to be kind of gritty. Soil can kind of get in between the layers. So you do need to wash them. And in addition, like these here, I'm washing off the main dirt in the sink, but and in fact, I try to avoid getting a lot of dirt down the sink. So the real dirty dirt, I just rinse around in a bucket, and then I dump the bucket outside because you don't really want to get dirt down your sink. It might not do too well in your pipes. It might just clog things up by settling in the low spots. So, but with leeks, you have to not just wash the outside, but also wash the inside. There's different ways. One is to cut them in half. Once you trim off the part that you're going to save for soup stock, you cut them in half and sort of take them apart and rinse them. Another thing a lot of folks do, and we did this last week, is we just did the whole chop, but we put all the chopped leeks into a bowl of water and to rinse off the rest of the grit, because it's kind of annoying to have your teeth grind on your potato leek soup. Leeks are also pretty hardy. So this one and several others near it, I didn't harvest till midwinter. And in fact, one batch, I didn't want to eat all of them. I had a lot that year and I didn't want to eat them all. So I dug them up and I replanted them in a sizable pot. And then I just let them out, getting all the sun and the rain and stuff. And then when it turned super cold, I don't know exactly what temperature they will live down to, but if it was going down into the teens, I would bring the pot inside for a few days until the warm weather came back. And that way I had leeks all through the winter. Live, living, fresh leeks, not even ones that languished in the refrigerator. They languished in nature's refrigerator of the world. So looking back at our big group photo, what's another favorite that a lot of folks plant and is really pretty easy to do once you get the timing right is garlic. And folks mostly are probably familiar with, you buy the heads, which are those big round things on top, and you break them up and you peel each little clove, is what the bottom ones are called. And when you what you plant, you tend to plant it in the fall, sort of like daffodils and tulips and things that you plant in the fall, and then they come up in the spring. They're down there in the winter they like having a certain amount of cold, and they're establishing a root system, and then they are ready to rock and roll when the spring rolls around. And these cloves, these heads and these cloves certainly look very different from each other. The ones on the top, in addition to, the biggest difference between them is that some of them are what's called hardneck. You can see on the right here, and some of them are called softneck. So with the hardneck, if you take apart the cloves, you come down and you have this like stick in the middle. The softneck, it's just cloves all the way to the center. Hardneck garlic tends to be better adapted to colder climates. Although here in Pittsburgh, we can grow either because they're both fine for our climate. Softneck tends to be better for long-term storage, though. I'm not sure what it is about it, but I usually try to use up my hardneck first after a harvest as I go through the year, because the softneck does last a little bit longer. And another side benefit of softneck, should you be really into aesthetics, is you can braid it. These are softnecks, and sometimes you can just cut off the stem, but if you want to have a pretty hanging braid, you want to use it up fairly soon, though, because I did that my first year and I hung them all in the kitchen, and they didn't like that so much. It was just too warm and dry, and so they kind of dried out and shriveled up. So the following years, although I braided some, I only brought up one braid at a time. I kept the rest down in the basement where it's cooler. This was my crop a couple of years ago. I think there were about 350 bulbs in all. The soft neck I braided, and the hard neck I just trimmed and put in little boxes so I could count them. And that's how I can tell you there were 350. It didn't quite last us the year, which tells you something about our garlic intake in my family. And as one often does with any kind of sustainable gardening system, I save the biggest cloves, the biggest heads to plant for the following year. So you plant them in the fall, and it can stretch into the winter. I just planted a bunch last week, and they're going to be fine. I think a lot of these I didn't plant till winter, as I will have evidence of in the next photo. You plant them in the fall, in the winter if you have to, but sometimes the ground freezes and you can't. So the fall is the classic time, sort of October-ish, October, November. And that gives the root system a chance to get established. So they probably will be a little more successful, a little bigger if you do get them planted in the fall. So I don't want it to sound like everybody should be late like me, but it does work a little bit later. And then they're just there and they grow and they do their thing, and you harvest them along about in July. So we'll talk about that in a bit, but back to how you plant them and what you're planting, because there's a lot of different kinds of garlic. I mentioned hardneck and softneck, but the softnecks come in let's see, silver skin, artichoke, and Middle Eastern are main. There's 11 categories or horticultural groups, and they have some major differences between them. The hardnecks, there are porcelain, rocambole, purple stripe, marble purple stripe, glazed purple stripe, turban, Creole, and Asiatic. I bet you didn't know that when you bought garlic in the store. And so these garlics here with little signs on them, and you can also see some of them have have Sharpie writing on them, because I visited some friends in the Finger Lakes who have a garlic farm. They have hundreds of varieties of garlic that they grow there, and some are better for roasting, and some are better for keeping in good storage, and some of them are better for braising or making pesto or whatever. But there's a lot of different varieties from all around, at least the Northern Hemisphere. I know there's some from Russia and China and in terms of where they were bred. So I have to confess, I did not actually keep track of all of these carefully labeled things. So I just have a bunch of different garlic, and I grow hardneck and softneck, and I basically, so I can eat the hardneck sooner. How do we turn these heads? And there's about 35 heads in that. So that may be the bulk of what I planted that year. No, it wasn't all, but those ones that are labeled are all from the Friends farm. So each head doesn't have as necessarily, some have 10 cloves, some have 12 cloves, some will really have 4 or 5 cloves. It depends, I'm sure, on the type. So this is just out in the garden, and I'm preparing the bed there behind. And so first step is aside from preparing the bed, is you have to break them all up. So here I just lined them up so that I could figure out how many rows this was going to do. I tend to plant in double rows just because it's a little easier and faster to prepare the soil. And so I make a trench about 6-7 inches wide, and I improve the soil down there. And in fact, this is being planted in a rooftop garden bed that's only about 5 inches deep. So that soil gets a good workout. So I add some compost to wake up the biology, because it's been out there getting sunned and rained on and had stuff grown in it. And actually the previous crop in here was bush beans. So that was great, because that put in some nitrogen to supplement it. And I add usually some organic fertilizer, just granular, just because, again, this is in a rooftop garden and there's only so much soil there. If it were down in the real ground and the soil was good down at depth, then the roots would be going down, and fungal mycelia would be going down and doing exchange. The fungus sends out the little threads. If you ever pick up a handful of really rich earth or compost and you see these little white threads, there's 2 things it could be if they're really little. If they're moving, they're nematodes, of which there's good ones and bad ones. And if they're not moving, they're fungal mycelia, which are little fibers that reach into the soil, and they bring nutrients to the plant. It's a symbiotic relationship where the plant gives them sugars, which it makes through photosynthesis, and the fungus provides nutrients that it pulls out of the soil, minerals and such. So, and then other nutrients like nitrogen, you kind of have to get in the soil some way because it's used up and goes into the air. So just a plug for a great living soil. One of the reasons that we garden organically, aside from not putting poisons on, and so that you're not eating poisons. Pesticides and herbicides also kill good things in the soil, and without a good soil biology, you don't have that symbiotic relationship. And so they have to just, conventional farming is just feeding, having a dead soil and putting in nutrients, so you're feeding the plant. We prefer to feed the soil, to give the soil things that it needs, and then the soil and the life in the soil feeds the plant. So just my little plug for the organic way of life. When you are planting it, and so I'm putting those at about a 6-inch interval. So I'm just zigzagging, so they're each about 6 inches from each neighbor. And then we'll make another trench a little bit over, so another, sort of probably a foot on center to give them a little space. And that's when I'm filling a bed. There's another style I'll show you in a moment. But a very key thing to note is when you are putting those cloves in, and they're going to go down about 3 inches or so is a good depth. You have to put them right side up, or they will be very sad, overworked garlics trying to turn themselves, just sending a shoot the wrong way. So there's always a squarish end that's a little nubbly, because that's where the roots will come out, and that's where it attached to the base of the head, and then a pointier end. And in fact, this one you can see, the one in the center, a little green sprout there. That one is saying, "Put me in the ground, put me in the ground, I'm ready to go." So, so after filling the trench with soil, I generally cover the whole area with straw mulch, not hay, because hay is like full of seeds and it behaves quite differently than straw. Straw is the waste leftover material from like grain crops. So it suppresses other weeds is one of its actions. It actually can bring in weeds that are the grain crop that it's the straw of, but I have harvested a nice little crop of wheat, which I could have made maybe, a little small loaf of bread out of if I hadn't left it in the basement where the mice ate it. But at least they're few enough that you can see them and pull them out. And garlic can really handle pretty thick mulch. So that will really suppress most weeds, because the sun can't get to the soil surface where the seeds are trying to sprout. It also keeps the soil, the temperatures a little more moderate. So in the winter, it keeps in the warmth. In the summer, it shades the soil and keeps it cooler and moister, so you don't have to water as much. So I'm a pretty big mulcher. This next picture shows zero mulch, but that's because it's in the spring. The garlic has come up, and this is at a school garden that I managed at Langley Middle School in the West End, as in an after-school program. And here we've just taken off the mulch and are preparing the soil around for other crops. And that's one of the nice things about garlic, is it just sits there and does its own thing. So if you have a bed that's 3 or 4 feet wide, it's a little hard to reach the center. So I just plant a row of garlic down the center, and then I don't have to think about that until, it's time to pull it next July. And that makes it very, very convenient. And then you can plant other things. As long as you're not going to totally shade the garlic, you can plant other shorter things on either side. And so for gardens which I'm working with kids, this is a great method, because they can be excited by seeing the garlic grow, but they can also very easily reach the soil on the side. So here it is, just as we're clearing it in the spring. And then here's a more mature batch of garlic, which you can see I mentioned before, part of my growing is on a roof garden. And these are some of the deeper beds. And behind that is rhubarb. And I don't know, can you see my cursor?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, because I've been looking at this other screen that gives me the next slide picture. So anyway, I'm trying to just not use my cursor very much. But in the foreground there is garlic. So that's more mature garlic. And one of the distinctive differences between hardneck and softneck is that hardneck will put up a flower, basically a flower stalk. And these curlicue things, which are really cool looking, are called scapes, garlic scapes. And they are essentially a flower. That's the bud, that long white thing. And but being all the parts of the garlic plant are edible. So you can bring them in and cook with them. So in the earlier summer, before you want to harvest the garlic itself, you can harvest the scapes from all of your hardneck garlic and chop that up. You have to be sort of a little careful because if you get too far down the stem, it gets a little tough, or if it gets too mature, it gets a little tough, but you can do a lot with it. And there on the left are the cross sections of the buds that are just very pretty. So sometimes you can fry them and have them be, or decorate them on the top of a frittata or something if you want to be fancy. They're just very pretty little flower things. But I use this for pesto because often, my basil is ready, but the garlic isn't ready to be harvested, but garlic scapes work just fine for pesto and make it even more green and beautiful. And they're a popular crop around. This is just one of them doing its curlicue thing in my garden. And on the right is a basket of them at a local farmer's market. These are grown by Who Cooks For You Farm, and they sell them by the little bundle because lots of people like them. One thing to note when you're wondering when is the time to harvest the actual bulbs. And I'm going to go back a second to that. So the plant is like a classic, like a daffodil or a tulip, but the shape of the leaf is different, so you can tell them apart. But after a while, as the summer goes on, usually sometime in July, some of the leaves will start to yellow and die. And so when that starts to happen, you want to pay attention. I don't have any pictures of the harvest moment, I'm afraid, but you want to make sure that there are some leaves, usually about 4 leaves, still living. And then at that point, you pull them up and they should come. This hardneck will usually come. Softneck should also come if you catch it at the right stage. If you pull on a stalk or the leaves of a softneck and it doesn't come, stop right where you are. Don't lose track of where that spot is and go get a trowel, because what can happen is, I mentioned you want to have about 4 or 5 leaves left that are still green and living, because what happens is as soon as the leaves are not green and living, each leaf corresponds to a layer of husk on that side of the clove, on that side of the head. Okay, so if the husk, if it's left in too long so that all the leaves have died, the husk will just decompose underneath because it's just dead plant material and it's in compost-rich soil. So what then you'll get is here, there's ones that did come up with their stalks, but there's not much of a husk there. So they were on the verge of falling apart. And sometimes they're just totally falling apart and I go in with a trowel to get them. And they're still perfectly good garlic. You just want to eat them sooner. So those are the ones you always eat first. So just bring those into the kitchen, or if you have a lot, keep some in the basement, because without the husk, they'll dry out faster. But they're perfectly good garlic. It's just, oops, I let it go a little too long to harvest. Another tip is that if that happens, but you don't go right in and get them out with a trowel, or you just miss one because you've got too many other weeds growing in your garden or too many other crops growing in your garden, like I often do. What happens is there's a head down there, right? There's a head with, say, 8 cloves of garlic, which you could have pulled. If you had gotten it out, it would have been 8 cloves of garlic in your kitchen, nice batch of aglio olio, or it could have been 8 cloves of garlic for next year's garlic plants. Each one of those cloves is going to try to produce a whole head. Okay, so if that happens, but they're all squished together in the space of one garlic head, they're going to be too crowded and they're going to be little and wimpy. So I actually have a picture taken just last week of a spot where I did miss some. And so there's a bunch together right there. And at that point, you have some choices. You can, and you might notice it in the spring when you go to prepare for some new bed, or these I noticed this winter, but there's 2 things you can do with them and still not have wasted them. One is eat them. I mentioned that garlic scapes were nice because they're a form of garlic that you can have before the garlic is ripe. And here you can eat them. It's called green garlic. It is also used, I mean, I've sold it to a restaurant. And so you can just have it. You can make even earlier pesto or a different kind of pesto, like sage pesto is a thing. So if you have a lot of sage over there in your sage herb garden, then you can make sage pesto, and here's a nice supply of garlic, because sage is pretty perennial and is out most of the year. Or you can separate them very carefully, sort of like that little bundle of baby onions I showed earlier. Separate them carefully, keeping the roots happy, and then plant them gently. And to plant something with roots hanging down, I always dig deeper, lay the roots in, and then backfill the soil against it. I don't just stuff them down, because then the roots will get all tangled and they won't be going as deep as they could, because that's another key. You want those roots to be extending down where they can use water that is below the surface during a dry spell. And so, and here, in fact, this mulch bed that I showed, the far side of it, there's little green things. And what those green things are is, when I was planting garlic last week in that particular bed, there were some bunches of leftover garlic from last year, and I separated them and planted them at better spacing. And so they now have a chance to develop into a full bulb. And then I also planted them in half the bed, and new full-size cloves in the other half. And I'll talk to me next July and I'll tell you which ones
Maren,
did better. Yes.
Just time check so we have time for the panel.
And the time check is, you want me to
7:47.
be done, or you want me to be?
What else do you have to talk about,
Yeah,
Shallots?
there's just, I'll just whiz real fast through things. So there's shallots, which are a type of perennial onion. There's also other kinds of perennial onions that sort of build up, they act like garlic basically, but they're more onion flavored. These are shallots from the food co-op. These are shallots that I grew, and you can also do them from seeds or from sets. Another kind, possibly the most versatile kind of allium, is seen there in just to the right of the leeks. Here I am actually pointing at my screen, silly me. To the right of the leeks, they're basically scallions, are the Egyptian walking onion. And this is the same very ones on the right before I clean them up. On the bottom there, the big hefty ones are bulbs from before that we just took in and had in the kitchen, and have been using them kind of as substitute shallots, although they're a lot stronger. Because these are, one more reason they're versatile is they are available most times of the year. This is a bunch of them that, I don't know if these are the exact ones I harvested, but they're there. They're not big and beautiful, but they're there. This is a garden bed in early March. There's rhubarb just coming up to the right, and on the left is very usable scallions. This is a little bit later March. This is early April. This is late April, and time to harvest. So the reason that these are called walking onions is that, just like hardneck garlic makes scapes, walking onions also put up a central flower stalk, and it goes up and it makes little bulbs called bulbils or bulblets. And sooner or later, that flower stalk will die and fall, and the bulbs will hit the surface, and they'll hit in little bunches. And these, I'm sorry, these aren't very impressive looking, because on the right here, because I just found them last week, and that's not really the time to go looking for bulbils. They're kind of dried up because they didn't hit a nice patch of soil. If they had, they would have rooted and made plants. On the left is showing that even in that old bulb, which I harvested, it's still trying to grow. There's a little sprout. So each single plant makes a whole cluster of plants, because these bulbils come in little clusters of 5 or 6 or 7. So this is, as I'm harvesting, this is a bunch. And usually what I try to do is harvest most of them, but not all of them, and then they will repopulate. And they can really grow anywhere. These landed on some stones at the edge of a garden bed, and they just rooted in the crack. And they can be quite lush. And they're great for anything, just for making onioniness. They're a fairly strong onion. So, these I just sauteed, and I don't remember what I did with them that time. But you can also grill them wonderful. I just sort of smear them with olive oil and salt and put them on the grill with anything else for grilling. I've also sold them. I've sold 120 pounds one year to a local restaurant. When I'm doing that, I need to prep them all nicely, so it's a bit time consuming. So, and in fact, here on the right in that bin, you can see there's walking onions on the left and green garlic on the right. I mentioned I sold it to a restaurant. And I've taken these to food pantries and a community kitchen and to one of Pittsburgh's finest restaurants. Here flanking the onions are buckets of Jerusalem artichokes, which I could do a whole nother talk about, although it would be somewhat briefer because this is really 5 talks rolled into one. And this was a pretty big harvest. Spent a while prepping it, but now it's in the kitchen of, this was, as I mentioned, one of the finest restaurants. So what is missing? There's one more very common allium. Any ideas? Shout it out. Chives. I had to go fast. So chives, I didn't have it. I should have. My chives are looking pretty scraggly right now, but they'll come back. But in the spring, they're great to have. This was one little batch of spring crops with asparagus and shiitake mushrooms and French sorrel and little second year growth broccolettes. And then here was another one with some other brassicas, a sort of hybrid of kale and collards that I seem to grow a lot, and violets and hostas. Did you know hostas? The little shoots of hostas on the upper left there are edible and very nice. Below the hosta shoots are fiddlehead fern babies. And anyway, lots of things. And I made myself a breakfast because in the middle was an egg from my neighbor's chicken. So that was like that entire plate of breakfast, with the exception of the olive oil or butter or whatever I used to fry it in, was all grown within about 100 feet of where I ate it. There are other allia. As I mentioned, there's only a few groups of allia out of 800 species that we do eat. Ornamental alliums, this is just a little shot with big purple balls you see in people's gardens about 2 feet high. And that is it. Now I will relinquish my share. And if there's time, Kristen and I would be happy to take any questions you have about growing or using allia. And thank you for your attention. And I should note that a few of those photographs were from a site called Pexels. They had photo credits, basically the globe onions were from there, and the bulb onions, and the rest were basically from my garden.
Thanks, Maren. That was awesome. Let's start. Kristen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Hi, I am also a master gardener, and I just began to work with ReImagine Food Systems for this coming garden season. Yeah, I have worked and managed CSAs and small diversified vegetable farms, mostly in central Pennsylvania, not here in western Pennsylvania. And that's where all of my experience comes from, outside of Hawaii, which is tropical botany, or tropical horticulture, which is inapplicable to western Pennsylvania, but I can also answer orchid questions. Thanks. If anyone has a question, you can drop it in the chat. Or you can unmute and we can have a discussion, even if you don't have a question, or if you just have a comment, or you want to share what you're doing in your garden. Stan has a question. Why do some people avoid garlic and onions for spiritual reasons? they use hing instead.
What's hing?
Hing is it's I don't really know exactly what ma hing is from. And I also don't know why or who avoids garlic or onions for spiritual reasons.
Vampires?
I don't
No
know
idea.
who does. I don't know who does. Li Hing powder is red and it's very sour.
Well,
I don't
garlic and
know.
onions are not sour.
I don't know if that's the same thing as hing. Question: what's the most beginner allium to grow? Chives.
Chives, yeah. Followed by walking onions, followed by garlic. I mean, you saw those vast tracts of walking onions harvesting at 120 pounds a year and not making a dent, but not running low. And usually I would be time constrained because when it puts up the flower stalk, it gets a little tough. So the restaurant wanted it for grilling. I can still cut it up. I've dehydrated them, cut them up and dehydrate them and grind them in the food processor into a powder. And then I have onion flavor anytime I want it. Didn't mention that. But they basically grow themselves. And I started my walking onion plantation from a CSA share with scallions. And I said, that has enough roots to try to grow. Oh, and another kind of allium that we do eat when we can get it. Anybody know? It's a very delicacy. Is ramps.
Ramps, yeah.
They're also known as wild leeks. In fact, we were on sabbatical when I first really came to understand what ramps were. We were on sabbatical and we were in a little village in Switzerland on the Rhine River. And we went on this hike up through the mountain nearby, and there at a sort of a flat section of the mountain by where the trail went was a big tract of what I took to be lilies of the valley, which are poisonous, mind you. And they, and then in the little butcher shop, he had special seasonal bratwursts that were Bärlauch, so bear leeks. So I guess bears like these. And it's like, oh, and then I went back to that same place and I very delicately harvested some because they can be over harvested. And I think in this country, they often are. There were a zillions. I just took the leaf, but I probably could have taken, there were so many, I could have taken some bulbs as well. And I've worked to establish them at my house. They're very slow to reproduce, but I do finally they're making some babies. So I've never harvested them. I've only planted them, but hopefully someday I will have more that I can harvest some of. And
Question from anonymous audience member: how do you prevent crying when chopping onions?
Sunglasses or safety goggles. Some people say if you refrigerate it, it might be less. Some people do it under running water, which I would find hard to use a cutting board under running water. But you might do some of the cutting before you take the thing apart. Could be under running. And I've never noticed crying from garlic, but I certainly do from onions. And I mean, I do a lot of woodworking. So I possess safety goggles. If it's bright enough, I just use sort of, well-fitted sunglasses. So I think, how are we on time?
1 minute.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're almost at 8. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming. If we have any final thoughts, now's the time. But our next meeting is the first Monday of February.
And folks can look in the chat, and Kristen was answering some questions that came up during the talk. I could not keep track of my next slide and what I was saying in the chat also. So
Do you want to answer Rhea's question as the final question?
Oh. Sleeping with a slice of onion placed in their sock.
Annie?
I believe there's not no. Someone mentioned that and I looked it up and I think it's an urban myth or a rural myth or some kind of myth. And so I don't think it removes toxins. I don't know, maybe breathing in the sock. I don't understand why. But it is a thing that people have talked about. And a few weeks ago, a month or two ago, I heard about it and I looked it up and there was a fairly reputable source saying, nope, sorry. So you can find that reputable source and see if you think how reputable it is. A bar of soap. So you're removing toxins through your feet. But influenza isn't about toxins so much as the virus replicating itself at your expense. And it's not doing it in your feet, it's doing it in your respiratory system.
Also, I'm going to send a follow-up email tomorrow or in the next couple of days with the recording from this program
Thanks.
and any resources that our speakers would like to share.
Mhm.
I think
And
Heather
there are
had,
some new, there are a number of new people here tonight.
Welcome.
And so we welcome you and we encourage you to come back. Well, once a month, there's a program on an interesting topic that has to do with sustainability. But in terms of the gardening program, is it April that's going to be the food forest? That should be of interest to people who are here tonight.
Mhm.
yeah, we'll be learning about food forests from Juliet Olshak, who works at
Excellent.
yeah, who works at Phipps now. But she's done in the past like food forests, specifically one in Hazelwood. And that's creating like a forest-like system as a means of like having a healthy garden and yard and or community space. So, yeah, if anyone wants to introduce themselves, I'm going to stay on for a second. I'd love to hear from the new folks. I see Sarah,
Yeah, and if-
Barb. I know Nina.
Mhm. There are, another thing for the new folks is something that might interest you is I myself organize another monthly event. It's called Sustainability Salons, and it's basically an environmental education thing. The best way I used to be able to describe it is that it's a big potluck mini conference. And I do know Barb from years ago. Hi, Barb. And I don't know if you're still on my list. I don't know if your email might have changed in the meantime, but it's not a potluck these days. It's generally on Zoom. It's been going for 10 years exactly. The number 120 will be next Saturday, and we're not going to have a topic. Usually I have several speakers on different aspects of a topic or theme. And we will also be doing, I always do in the spring, a couple of months on food. So food growing, maybe I'll reprise this talk, but that would be just part of it. I'd try to compress it a bit, perhaps. And farmers and restaurateurs and food educators and food activists and all kinds of food people. And it'll be either March and April or April and May, depending on how other things shake out. And if you might like to be on my email list, shoot me your email in the chat and I will add you.
Okay, thanks everyone. Happy New Year. If you want to get more involved with TCWAC, please feel free to reach out to me. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Maren. That was excellent.
Thank you.
And thanks for